Everybody, and welcome back to the Crypto Night Show. Your host Superman in the house, and of course, it's wonderful being able to stream onto multiple platforms these days. And of course, just started streaming on Rumble, and also now got a site on X as well. So big shout out there over to Rumble as and X because it's really fun to be on those. Expanding out from YouTube, of course. So really excited here, and of course, heading up from 11,000 followers and subscribers up to 14,000. So big numbers going on here, and really excited to see all your support. Now, I've moved from expanding from just doing crypto shows to doing variety shows where I cover politics, economics, sports, and the like. So if you love that sort of variety show content, then definitely follow and hit the like button as well, and of course share around. Now, if you want to get into our Discord as well, the link to the Discord is in the video description. Fantastic community in there, and we talk about everything, and what a bunch of great people as well. So if you like all the resources, all the insights, and cool people, then definitely join up to a Discord. Only $12.50 a month in there. And of course, you want to get in the Strategy Club for the next level thing, that is only $35 as well a month. So get in there. And we actually have a beginners to intermediate to advanced crypto course in there as well. Only $74.99 for 15 video series, which will really empower you to move into crypto big time. But today we're getting into politics, and we're going to be covering this for our second show. If you missed the crypto show earlier today, just check the channel video for the last video, and you'll be able to pick that up as well. Don't forget to get in the comments and let us know your thoughts as well. This is a PG channel, so keep it family friendly. That's all I would ask. So kind of cool. Let's see who's in the chat there. We've got Ishad in the house there. Good to see Ishad. Good morning, sir. And lots of love there. Hey, big shout out to you. Hope you're doing very well also. So kind of cool. Let's get straight into it though, without further ado, and let's get into the topic there. So we're going to be talking about President Trump's master plan. Many people are confused at the things that he does because he has the art of the deal, and he keeps to that pretty awesomely, and keeps people guessing what he's doing a lot of the time. And that is one of his principles of the art of the deal, this famous book that he wrote, and of course how he operated in property as well. So yep, President Trump's master plan for America and of course the world. I'm going to explain that, so I hope you guys enjoy it and get a lot of insights. And if you really like it, share it around, because it really is a great summary, and I really haven't seen it anywhere else at this stage. So get in on that. All right, without further ado, let's get into it, and we're going to get into the presentation there. So fight, President Trump there. And of course, you couldn't ask for better imagery there with the US flag and the future president, former President 45, now President 47 there as well. And of course, that Secret Service agent there in that picture is now head of the Secret Service as well. So pretty awesome stuff going on there. And of course, he gave the honorary Secret Service membership to that young lad with recovering from cancer. So some pretty cool stuff there at the Congress speech that Trump held. Pretty neat there. So let's get into it. The USA was in trouble, and I say was. It's still got obviously a lot of work to be done to fix it up, but it was in trouble, and of course it needed help, right? So the world was in trouble too. So the world really needed really needed a good ethical leadership there, and of course Trump there with that fighting spirits come in to save not just the United States but also the West as well. And we're going to delve into what that looks like. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the problems. So we've got the U.S. government has particular problems, and the federal budget deficit is a big one, right? So very important there. At the moment, the revenues are just over $5 trillion in revenue for the federal budget. And think about US GDP being about 27.8 billion. So it gives you a trillion, sorry, 27.8 trillion. So 5 trillion against that gives you an idea of how big the Federal Reserve is compared to the GDP of the country. And of course, the expenses that it have is the big problem, right? That's the big problem. It's got $7 trillion in expenses. So that is huge, a problem there. So it's running big deficits, right? $2 trillion deficits. It's insanity, really is insanity there. And of which that 2 trillion, 1 trillion alone is in interest payments. So it's mind-bogglingly crazy, really crazy there. Interest payments of $1 trillion, and we're kind of in this kind of moderately high interest rate cycles as well. And every year, some of that, the debt that the US has comes into renewal. So it is a crazy problem. So this is the problem that Trump's coming in to deal with, right? No other president was dealing with it, right? They were just making the expenses bigger and bigger. and if anything, constraining revenue. Trump's idea, of course, is to deal with these big problem of expenses just climbing, and of course this budget deficit of 2 trillion. So we're going to talk about that. That's one of the big problems there that he's got to come in. And it's fine for people to make ideological positions, but the financial realities hit people hard in the nose when they catch up. So this is accumulating to this deficit, right? This is just 1 year. So accumulated deficits adding to the debt, which we're going to look at next. So let's have a look at breakdown of those expenses, right? The big problems, like the last one was the problem. Now it's the big problems because the federal expenses are pretty big at 7 trillion. We've got general expenses. We've got income security. We've got VA, the veterans as well, sitting at around 2 trillion. And we got Medicaid at 1.7 trillion. Obviously, it's pretty important there. And we've got Social Security at 1.5 trillion. So some big numbers. And of course, you see a lot of lies coming out on the mainstream media from the Democrats in particular that these were going to be changed. There was no talk from Trump about changing these. The only thing he has talked about is getting rid of fraud, which we've seen with Elon Musk and Dodge and things like that. So obviously that's just a red herring to scare people because that's what they like to do. Now, defense in the US is the biggest in the world, $0.9 trillion. It's crazy numbers, about 880 billion, and that's a year. And that's why the America is the greatest, defense armor in the world. So compare that to China, which I think is around about $300 billion. That's kind of a comparison there. So US is ginormous, right, as well. Now, that is defense. So you can see also interest payments. We talked about that is a 1 trillion. So it's a pretty big number, pretty insane, right? Pretty insane number there. And that's just paying people, right? So about 880 billion, I think it is owned by, is in debt, is owned by foreign powers, and that's about 30 to 40 $1 billion a year going to China, feeding China there. So you can take opinions about whether that's good or bad, but that's how much it is. So let's get in. We've looked at some of the problems there. We've got those are the problem, and the problems is the big expenditures in the US, but the mega problem is the US debt. So that stuff all accumulates, all those deficits every year accumulate, and here we are at a massive $36.6 trillion in US debt. Isn't that crazy? That's the mega problem. It is just hanging over the United States, and it's very scary and terrifying. And no one was going to deal with it until Trump's come along, right? So that's why we're seeing major moves from Trump, moving very fast. Of course, if you don't move fast, then your enemies come at you and they don't care about the problem, right? They don't care about people and the economy. They only care about themselves and corruption and power and control. So Trump does, though. Trump cares about the American people and he wants to deal with this debt, right? So that's very important here. So it's good news that Trump is fighting for this. And of course, the US trade deficit's also a problem. $1.3 trillion in US trade debt. Now, this excludes services, right? This is just goods, and 1.3 trillion in the debt. And of course, the US has run trade deficits right back to 1975. Yeah, get back on your seat because it's pretty shocking, I know. $1.3 trillion in trade deficits. That's why he talks about trade deficits all the time. Now, excluding services, but trade deficits all the time, and it's because 1.3 trillion is a big number. So US has got a lot of problems, as you can see, and they're just getting bigger and bigger, out of control, right? Of which China has 0.3 trillion, about $300 billion of that trade deficit is to China. So obviously realigning China is very important in dealing with this issue, right? And of course, many thought that, China industrializing, manufacturing and stuff like that would mean that China would become like a modern Western liberal democracy. That's kind of what people thought. But of course, it hasn't. It's become a very powerful authoritarian regime. And of course, its people are pretty much in an open air prison, right? That's pretty much it. They have credit scores and all sorts of other things. You can't travel to certain cities and things like that. So there's tons of problems there. The only way to get up, of course, is go through the party, the political communist party. So, how much freedom is there? Massive prosperity. No one's doubting that, of course, but massive oppression there as well. We also see at the moment, of course, that China's having a little bit of a tit-tat with power. Amongst that, of course, President Xi was trying to consolidate power, but of course, he's been getting challenged a little bit recently by the military, and it looks like there's fractions there. So there's a lot of things going on in the China there, but this is not about China so much. This is about the United States. So debt maturing. So with all this debt maturing during moderate to high interest rate periods at the moment, So the federal funds rate at the moment 4.5%. So you got a certain amount of debt coming out. Let's say $7 to $10 trillion coming out each year. And it's all sorts of different types of debt structures on those, but they ended up, let's say 2-3 trillion. It's going to end up being stuck at short-term higher rates, and so the debt is maturing, particularly in 2025, last year as well, during moderate to high interest rate periods, right, at that 4.5%. So short-term soft recession may actually lower the interest rates from the Federal Reserve. They may move and lower the interest rate. So that talk about a soft recession could encourage Fed cuts there. Is that a short-term ploy of Trump? We shall see. Obviously, it's been in the news recently, but that is a possibility to soften things up just in the short term to encourage the Fed to cut rates a bit more than 2 times this year. So we're expecting 4.5 down to 4% by the end of the year there. So we'll see how that goes. So there are the big problems, folks. We've talked about the expenses, talked about the US debt, talked about the trade deficit, massive problems, and of course they were just getting bigger as the Democrats in particular and parts of the Republican Party called the Uni Party were feeding that debt. Right, we just don't care about Americans, only care about power, money, and control. So and enslaving the people. That's pretty much it. So there we go. We got obviously we've had government problems. We've got economy problems. Other major problems in the U.S. economy are pretty general. So we've got modest inflation at the moment, 2.8%. Obviously, the target is 2%. And for the inflation rate, interest rates, of course, currently at 4.5%. And of course, debt is being refinanced there from the federal debt. Manufacturing, this has been a huge problem for the United States. So since the mid-70s, about 1975, has lost about 7 million jobs in manufacturing. That's about 35%. So it's gone from about 20 million people employed in manufacturing down to about 13 million. Can you believe it? So it's a big loss in manufacturing jobs. A lot of those jobs, of course, went for a number of reasons to China and Southeast Asia in particular, and obviously to other further afields like India and places. But 7 million jobs there gone, about 35% decrease in the total amount of manufacturing. So big deal there. And you know why that was a big deal? Because it was feeding the middle class in America. America had a strong, big middle class. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Now, even the fact that it's down at about 30 million jobs at the moment, 10% of that of manufacturing makes up 10% of the GDP. So manufacturing still, even with that 35% reduction, makes up about 10% of the US GDP. And as I said earlier, the US GDP is about $27.8 trillion. So that's about 2.8 trillion in manufacturing GDP. So that kind of gives you the idea there. And you've heard Trump talk about manufacturing a lot, right? Middle class is down about 11%. So that's in percentage points. So the PP there, percentage points. So that's down about 11%. So the middle class has shrunk since the 70s, right? And of course, the high incomes were lost as a result, right? You're losing these big high value manufacturing jobs, generally speaking. So you're losing that, right? So America's very big on computers, big on chemicals and all sorts of other things that they produce in the manufacturing class. So it gives you an idea of some of the things that Americans do. Now, infrastructure is aged as well in the United States and deteriorating. They have I think it's a C minus ranking on that. It used to be a D plus or something ranking for infrastructure in the US. It is aged, right? America is ginormous. You can see it from space, right? At nighttime, it's lit up like a light bulb compared to anywhere else in the world. But the actual infrastructure on the ground is getting very aged. So roads, bridges, telecommunications, you name the type of infrastructure, and it's getting aged, right? Or not. If it's not being aged, it's not being updated, right? So there's a big problems there. So this crosses a range of different types of infrastructure. Now, obviously, there have been some bipartisan infrastructure bill over the last Biden period, but of course, only probably about 50% of that's actually been deployed, and then you still got a question where it's all gone, right? So very important there. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. Infrastructure aged and deteriorated, roads and bridges. Technology behind is as well. Technology behind, especially in semiconductors. So the US only produces about 12% of semiconductors. About 55% of semiconductors is made in Taiwan, which is pretty important there as well. DJ Paulie Wood thought it was an RH emergency stream. Well, you need to read the title there, DJ. The title is pretty self-evident. I don't know how you can get confused with that. We've got technology behind, especially semiconductors, 12%. So that is where we are on that. So pretty crazy. So the US has a lot of risk there because technology is based on semiconductors, and so a very important problem there. Only 12% in the US, and of course. We've also got the fact that Taiwan has about 55% of the market, and of course that's just across the road from China, and we know China wants to get that. So pretty interesting there. Now, energy stunted by Biden, of course. He stunted the Biden. We had pretty big production, despite the XL pipeline being shut down. In terms of that being built out there, and we also had new leases, right? Also get stopped. Federal new leases also get stopped there too. So big problem there. Also, self-sufficiency in the US has been exposed, particularly around minerals, especially rare earths. And so, they've been looking at, scaling up Mountain Pass. The Elk Creek is looking to be built out as well. It's been approved. And of course, looking further field in America, into Brazil and Vietnam to catch up on rare earths. And that's particularly important in terms of the technological age, right? We keep talking about that. So you need semiconductors, you need rare earths. Right? Otherwise, you're stuck in the dark ages almost. And of course, China has been very advanced in that. So a very big problem there. And that brings us to global rivals on the rise, right? China, EU, India, Russia. So China there, obviously the big one there, they control a huge part, something like 70% of the market in rare earths. So it's a big deal there. And they also have a big chunk of the semiconductor market as well. So maybe about 20% or so. So China there has been taking the lead, and they've been moving on us way back since about 2015, 2017. So China well advanced there. And it's one of its advantages is controlling the rare earth supply in the world. Like I say, over 70%. Some say up to 90%, but really manufacturing seems to indicate about 70% or so. So a big deal there. Also, other rivals like EU. EU there, particularly around cars and stuff like that. So the EU there being rival, particularly France. France on the science edge is actually a lot more ahead of a bigger threat than China is, particularly around AI compared to the US. So that's probably not a common knowledge, but France is there, despite all its other problems. It seems to be advancing very well, mathematics and physics, and of course around AI. Of course, India also is another rival. India there is developing, sort of sitting in the sweet spot, right? A bit like Switzerland, a bit of a neutral spot there, but that's industrializing, it's militarizing, and it's also running imperialism, right? So just like China, both China and India are running imperialism. In other words, their population spreading to other countries, taking over other countries, countries like New Zealand, Australia, and other places, and they're very gleeful about that. And of course, it's a bad thing for us. But once again, that's what imperialists do. And of course, if you have traitorous liberals and progressives running a country, you're pretty much screwed, right? So they're going to betray you, sell their soul to the devil, as it were. And then we've got Russia, of course, out there. So Russia also is obviously a big player on the game, and also competing in oil and gas and other activities like that. So food like wheat and things like that. So global rivals on the rise. And of course, normally you might hear about talking about China and Russia, but EU and India are big players in the global rivals there. So that's kind of where we are with other major problems in the US. So there's a lot of issues to deal with. Trump's got to deal with this plate that has been given. The other one, of course, is US society. The problems. We've got healthcare, right? So healthcare is a big problem in the US in terms of US society problems. Justice and enforcement and corruption are huge problems in the US, right? And particularly under the Bidens, we saw them turn on parents, arresting parents for their own opinions, protecting their kids, things like that. So pretty crazy things going on there. And we also see, political rivals being arrested, as we saw with Trump and many of his allies and supporters. Illegal immigration obviously been a massive problem with something like maybe 13 million people or more running through over the border during Biden's period. So that's been a big problem, which is kind of ironic given that Obama probably threw out of the country about the same amount. Now, not a lot of people know that, but they kind of did back then. So it just shows you how the world's turned. But of course, they're what they're wanting to achieve to take power. What they're willing to do, they'll do illegal immigration. They'll sacrifice millions of people. This is what we're dealing with the Democrats for power and corruption. So the crime, of course, went through the roof in major cities, particularly in blue states. It's been pretty bad. And of course, terrorism there as well is huge. There's lots of terrorist pockets. There will be probably Russian, Chinese terrorist cells, Islamic terrorist cells, possibly even North Korean terrorist cells in the United States that are just sitting dormant. So a lot of problems there in the US. We see them coming through the southern border. A lot of them being picked up there. We've got obviously poverty is a big problem in the US, particularly under the Biden administration, moving for climate change and net zero. Both of them terrible policies for a fake problem, right? So huge there, and of course, just laying them to control. Homelessness in the US is a big problem, something that hopefully will play out with Trump. Trump has mentioned homelessness, and of course, there's always a couple of million, probably bigger than that now in the US. So that's a big deal that needs to be cleaned up, particularly in Democrat cities. So hopefully, Trump will, with all the things he's doing, will end up dealing with that too, both directly and indirectly. So we're looking forward to that on that one. Then the next one, of course, is drugs and alcohol. Big problem on the streets. Over 100,000 people a year getting killed with fentanyl. Numbers could be as high as 300,000. So big deal there. In places like Canada, they just set up drug places and give you drugs and get you killed. Whereas getting people off drugs is really the right way to go. So hopefully Trump will do a lot of stuff in the drugs and alcohol. And of course, he doesn't have drugs and alcohol, right? Since he's never had in his life, and it's been one of his big things. What's made him succeed, right? Because he hasn't had those distractions. Marxism, of course, is a big problem in the universities, in the Democrat Party. It's a big problem in a lot of the agencies, institutions. Marxism has crept in, and of course, we know Marxism results in failed economies and failed states, right? But it keeps rearing its ugly head. It's also a secular movement. So it becomes a bit of a secular religion for people that don't believe in God. So that's a big problem too. And then, of course, globalists, right? These the people very much at the top, billionaires and other influencers that want to take over the world, enslave the people, and trick them to do it, right? So and then they laugh while they're drinking champagne, driving their private jets, while everyone else is apparently supposed to, watch their emissions. So this is kind of people that you're dealing with, and of course, Trump has really shaken them up with the WF and things like that. So a lot of problems there. And then there's other radical ideologies, right, like Islam and all the associated things to that. Even some Sikh groups and lots of other different radical groups out there too. So it's a big deal, and Trump's got there's a lot of problems inside to deal with. So those are some of the problems. But there's the good news, folks. The good news is Trump's master plan, and that is really cool. So Trump's master plan is looking good, and here it goes. So we're going to talk about solutions, and of course, normally we aren't doing that, but with Trump, we've got a master plan, and this is really going to be some insights. So I hope you guys really gain a lot from this. So plan for Trump globally: world peace through strength, right? World peace through strength. We've heard that a lot, right? And of course, he wants to end the Russian-Ukrainian war. He's advancing that big time. He's using, some pretty strong stuff with getting Ukraine to the table. And of course, the US has funded something like up to $350 billion. Apparently, about $100 billion is missing. And we've got a lot of problems in Ukraine before the war. If you remember, mainstream media used to talk about the Nazis, the crime. And then during the war, we found out about biolabs and lots of terrible things. And of course, we've seen people being, captured in the cities and sent to the front lines, all sorts of things. And of course, we've had about 4 million people leave Ukraine as well. And of course, we've got massive death there, right? So maybe about 700,000 Ukrainians dead. And that doesn't mention you normally get about 2-to-1 ratio for wounded. And then, of course, Russia, maybe 800 to 1 million people dead as well, plus all the wounded. So it's a barbaric thing with thousands of people dying every week. That's pretty horrific, right? Now, that war started in February 2023. Sorry, February 2022 for the Russia-Ukraine war. So it's been going for a while now. It needs to be ended right after 3 years. So important that does happen, and Trump's coming to save that, right? Europeans and the Democrats would have kept that war going forever until they ran out of people, right? So that's pretty much it. And if you think about the young Ukrainians, young Russians there dying for a pointless war, it is really a pointless war. And so it's good to see Trump ending that. Now, peace through strength is how that's going to happen. And of course, Russia has probably had enough of that war and wants to get back into the economic a liberal order, as it were, so that it can trade as well. Now, the other thing about ending this war is not just about saving lives and getting Ukraine rebuilt and things like that, but it also is about world peace. So Trump wants to get world peace, because with world peace, you can have safety, security, and prosperity. And that's the big plan. So that's what Trump's thinking about at the same time, getting rid of that war. Now, there's obviously other possible opportunities there around rare earths in Ukraine, although a lot of those rare earths have not been proven. Only stuff that's really been proven up so far has been like lithium, which is not a rare earth, but is important for batteries and obviously cell phones and other technology. So we'll see where that heads. The other one, of course, is ending the Gaza-Israel war. Now, that's probably going to take a bit longer. Obviously, Israel going back into Gaza to some degree because of failed peace negotiations and getting out the last 30 to 40 hostages that are expected to be alive. And of course, another October 7 incident recently as well. So a lot of issues going on there. But Israel's kind of standing alone there dealing with that. So I think there'll be a bit of a standoff from Trump from that point of view. And Israel just wants support to do that. But it's probably going to end up progressing. So we've got it's a bit of an open question about where that future will help, what that will look like. Obviously, we've got a lot of issues going around with Egypt militarizing on the border there. We've got the Turks as well, playing a lot of games, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe as well. A lot of people talk about Iran, but Turkey, think they're a bit of like a caliphate, Islamic caliphate themselves. And of course, we see Erdogan there trying to play lots of games. So there's a lot of stuff happening in that area. Hard power. So peace through strength through those two, just end the wars. And of course, they'll have different modes of doing that. The other one, of course, is using hard power. And of course, Trump is dealing hard power, that is using military might with terrorists in the Middle East. And of course, we see dealing with Hamas in Gaza via the Israelis, also with the Iran. And with Iran, of course, is a big deal because if they get nuclears, they're a terrorist state. They get nuclear weapons. That would be extremely bad for America and for Israel and for the rest of the world because they would actually use those nukes. That's the problem, right? They could deliver them in many ways, right? Through shipping containers, all sorts of different things, or airplanes, whatever, depending on what they're doing, what type of nukes they have there. And they may have enough fissile material for probably a dozen at the moment, at least. So the options there are running out. I think maybe only a couple of months at most, and then we may see instead of a peaceful option, which Trump wants, we may. And of course, he wrote a letter recently to get them to come to the table. That may open up a military event on the nuclear side. So obviously 80-90% of the people in Iran don't hate the regime that they're under. And of course, another alternative option there is, driving an armed civil takeover or a revolution. So we saw the first revolution. We got the terrible Islamics take over there. And of course, it's enslaved the people. And back in, I think it was the 60s, if I remember rightly. And now, of course, we want to see a reversal of that. And the Iranian people want to be just in a modern liberal democracy as well. So we'll see how that goes. But we could see some pretty drama there with hard power being used in Iran. Now, obviously, Houthis, another ally, along with Hamas to Iran, proxy as they call them. Houthis there attacking a lot of ships in Strait of Hormuz. And of course, they have recently tried to fire rockets and stuff against aircraft carriers in the Strait of Hormuz there, and of course being shot down. They said that they were attacking them and they're hurting them, but that's just rubbish. Their rockets, firing ballistic missiles, were shot down probably 100 kilometers before they even got close to the aircraft carrier. So, bit of humor there from the Houthis there, celebrating and dancing and doing big parades out on their main cities, right? So, pretty crazy stuff there. So they're being hit pretty hard at the moment by Trump there. So hard power is being used. And of course, they're not enjoying it very much at all, despite the little dance videos they put out. So the other one, of course, is ISIS. So ISIS also being dealt hard blow. We saw recently leaders being, taken out there. So he's taken those out as well. So Trump sending big signals there to ISIS, and of course potentially North Africa as well. Obviously, a lot of Islamist groups attacking with often sometimes other government opposition groups to take over the North Africa, which a lot of people may not know about. So that's a pretty big problem too. And of course, we've got Syria as well. So Syria now got a terrorist leader, what the Europeans aligned with, which just shows you how bad the globalists and Marxists and stuff running Europe are. And they align with terrorists all the time because what are they doing to their own people? They're basically, getting the countries being invaded by the same people, and they're sellouts. They sell their soul, as it were, to the devil. So there we are with that. So that's hard power being used. We can see that pretty cool. But of course, Trump's also using soft power globally, right? Kept Egypt, Turkey, and Syria in check. So obviously doing tactical plays on those. And of course, sanctioning South Africa from full-blown apartheid. obviously we've seen a bit of a reversal. So where we saw the whites run an apartheid back in the day, we're now seeing the blacks in America, particularly ANC, calling for the death of the Afrikaner and things like that. And so Trump has sanctioned them and taken away a lot of their funding, right? Now, the problem with South Africa is that they are following a Marxist path and, of course, an apartheid path. And, of course, that is not just apartheid, but actually quasi-genocide as well, with the actual, slaying of Afrikaners. There's been a number of deaths, of course, on farms and things like that because they incite this violence, right? Now, as you'll turn out, that in South Africa, the whites do not own like 90% of the land. As far as I know, they own about 20 to 30% of the land. A lot of the land is owned by the government, which has been accrued by the government, and they just let it sit there and do nothing. So if you want to deep dive into the land, it's not 80, 90%. It's about 20 to 30% that is owned by the white farmer. And don't forget, they are the food basket for South Africa. So they feed all the people, regardless of color and race and creed there. So very, very important there. And of course, they do a lot of the high-end engineering. So we saw what happened as elsewhere in Africa. So obviously dealing with that's going to be pretty interesting there too. Now, so that's putting a lot of pressure on South Africa. And of course, a lot of the cities are starting to get run down because they're being misrun, right? So you've got streets falling apart, buildings falling apart, whole capital cities falling in disarray, businesses closing down. Because of their taking this socialist Marxist view, and of course a very racist apartheid view, and of course a quasi-genocide view as well. So Trump is sanctioning that pretty hard to deal with that. So very important there. So even though Trump is Make America Great Again, America First, he's very well aware that these ethical issues still remain, and of course Trump as the leader of the free world still has a role to play in there. Otherwise, everything around, if it's falling apart, then it's eventually going to come home to your shores to some degree. So that's kind of where he is there at the moment. Now, the other thing, of course, we've seen the Vice President, J.D. Vance, and the President and others there challenge and pressure the EU, the European Union, the United Kingdom, the UK there, with their leaders, particularly Starmer in the UK, has become an authoritarian, a Marxist authoritarian. And, of course, he's actually, in many ways, worse than some of the bad players, what we consider traditionally bad players in the world, because he's oppressing the people, right? So people that he's allowing the invasion and takeover of the country, he's therefore also ripping down the UK, the white culture there, the British culture, and of course any of the British people there that are there, regardless of race, he's pulling down their cultures, and of course running an Islamization into the UK. And of course, they're already plotting to take over, right, the UK. So that's kind of the issues dealing with there. And he's facilitating it, right? So he arrests people that are complaining for writing stuff online, and yet he lets all the criminals who are raping and pillaging and murdering out back on the streets. So you've got an upside down word, and that's what you get from Marxist authoritarians, right? So that's kind of where we're playing on the UK. In Canada, we have got the kind of the same sort of thing going on in Canada with Trudeau, who's now stood down, and now we've got another guy from the former banker from the UK coming in there as well, Carney, and of course he's just decided to fly over to Canada to take over the leadership. He's unelected and is going to stand up for the elections coming up against Polyev, which is the Conservative leader currently dominating in the polls. Of course, Canada's trying to play off Trump versus Canada with the old Canada 51st state joke. But of course, Poilievre's doing pretty well. Now, Trump really is playing a very dangerous game in this one. So most things I agree with Trump with, but this one is a little bit dangerous because he may play into the Liberals there to hold power, and that would be a disaster, right? So he's made Poilievre has kind of taken the wrong approach, trying to be Canada first, and may have probably overplayed his hand a little bit. Poilievre, of course, I would argue is one of the best politicians in the world, and certainly capable of taking Trump on in that regards from a dialogue point of view. But I think he slightly overplayed his hand with this. But of course, he's trying to stand up and play against the Liberals who are trying to play Trump versus Canada to try to get power again. Now, Canada, of course, Canada's been very much destroyed across multiple categories by Trudeau. And of course, he's completely corrupt, and he's going to, get his little trust fund that he's been hiding once he gets out, right? All the backhanders from that. So we're going to see that, and of course, free speech has been removed, and the Canada identity has been smashed quite a bit. So that's kind of where we are happening on there. So a lot of soft power going to be using there, and of course, we saw J.D. Vance in Europe there talking about free speech, and of course, without free speech, you've got authoritarianism, and we're fighting back against globalists and Marxists in Europe. So who are the baddies now? Who are the baddies? Well, it's not traditional, just the Axis and allies. Some of the axis now are very, very bad. The EU and the UK are very bad indeed. We're seeing that creep into Australia and to some degree also in New Zealand as well. So manage North Korea. Obviously, Trump did very well in his 45th term to manage North Korea, getting a pretty good relationship with Kim Jong Il, and of course crossing the DMZ. It's kind of a good rap song, but crossing the DMZ. So he's done a pretty good job with that. And of course, the biggest problem that America faces is China. Now, even though China really hasn't had a war since 1969, I think it was, and it was only lasting about a month, we do know that they have big ambitions. And of course, they've been getting stronger military. They've got 2 aircraft carriers operational, a third one being commissioned, and they've got a fourth one under development. Those last two, of course, moving towards nuclear for the first time rather than diesel. Diesel generally means that you have to travel with fuel ships, which is a bit of a problem, and also typically makes you more of a coastal navy. And at the moment, China, even though it has the biggest navy now, has a lot of smaller ships as well as very much diesel based, and of course, very coastal naval, right? Which works well in the South China Seas and around Taiwan and places like that, but very difficult once you move out further afield. That being said, we did see 2 big warships go around Australia as a threat to Australia. And of course, they also took with them a big fuel supply ship and also did live fire there down around Australia. So that's a very worrying sign there. And of course, maybe they will test the resolve and the alliance between the US and Australia and the UK, of course, with the AUKUS agreement that's there at the moment, with Australia getting submarines from the US. So we'll see how that all plays out. And I do not think that Trump will let them just easily do a land invasion if they want to do that against Australia. Now, it won't be easy to do, of course, because the US has troops in Australia, as well as the fact there's probably 6 or 7 good air bases with many of the latest planes, F-35s there as well, and they have their own missile systems as also. So it won't be a walk in the park, but recently, of course, we've seen China start building some landing craft. They've got at least 5 of them, I think, that have been seen. They have multiple landing craft. They may be used against Taiwan, obviously, is the obvious play, but you never know. They might do a bit left wing stuff there, and maybe go to Australia as well, and do something a bit unconventional in terms of the way they're going to expand power. So we will see what happens there. In any case, America is turning away so much from NATO and Europe, and more moving towards getting Europe to fund their own military as well, moving towards the South Pacific there, particularly also Asia Pacific, and supporting its allies in South Korea, Japan, and other places like that. So Philippines and things like that. So the US is going to be militarizing and modernizing. Now, as we talked about, their budget's about 0.9 trillion, so about $880 billion. Now, Trump does want to lower that, of course, to cut costs, but he knows that at the moment he's got all these issues to deal with China and others, so he's got to keep that quite high. And so he wants to militarize. And of course, they've been running a lot of those low-level armaments through Ukraine and other places, right? And of course, he also wants to modernize, right? He wants to get the latest supersonics and other technology, advanced drones, and lots of different weapons like that, robotics, to modernize the military as well. And he's talked about doing this big Star Wars program to protect against nukes, right? So I think that's going to be very, very successful. Now, typically, the land-based missiles designed to take out nukes are about 50% successful. So moving to a star-based system, and of course, who can do that for him? Well, he's got Elon Musk, right? The rocket king, doing about 95% of all rocket missions in terms of watch hours. And so he's got the right guy to do that sort of system. And of course, we're doing satellites as well with Starlink and things like that. So he's got the perfect guy at his side to do that. And of course, that's going to be fun to see all that stuff develop there, along with the Secretary of Defense, right? So going to be pretty cool there. So the pivot to Pacific, and of course, China, US position is that they want a no change, but in this current status, in other words, Taiwan stays as Taiwan, and of course, Taiwan, remember, has 55% of the semiconductor market, and so that's a big deal, right? China gets that. Man, they're going up to over 3/4 of the semiconductor market, and that those chips fund all modern technology. So that'd be a huge problem for the US to lose, and of course the rest of the world to lose in case there was a regional/global war, right? So that's a big deal there. So deterring the Taiwan invasion, keeping the status quo, is where the US is looking as it pivots to the Pacific there. We also see China expanding its reach out even to random places in the South Pacific. And of course, recently we saw that in the Cook Islands, and that was a very controversial thing. And the Cook Islands didn't even tell New Zealand, who they have an agreement with, to tell them, and they didn't even tell them. So lots of funny things are going on there. An attempt to get rid of the Prime Minister in Cook Islands for not doing that by the Parliament failed. He survived that too. So there's lots of different things going on as China expands out into the South Pacific. Very worrying signs, and of course, sending military flotilla there out around Australia. Pretty scary stuff, to be honest. So we've also got that, and of course, we know Trump. Not only does he want to eventually reduce the military budget, but he also wants to denuke the world because that would make it a safer place. And of course, America was the one that actually pulled out of the nuclear agreement. I forget back what year, maybe 2007 or something. It was back a while ago, and they've got to get back into an agreement to reduce nuclear capability, right? So Russia obviously has the most nukes, the US the next, and of course China has got a lot as well. And then there's probably about 7 countries, if I remember right, they have nukes in the world. And so that's going to be a big thing to denuke the world because obviously the power is immense with nuclear power. So that's going to be something we'll see. So if Trump ends the war in the Ukraine, brings back Russia into the G8, then we could also get denuclearization progress as well. And if China gets on board, then you're going to make pretty good progress with that. Obviously, there's Pakistan and India and places like that out there too. Now, the other big thing, of course, that Trump's looking to do is secure resources because they're behind the 8 ball on that against China, right? China's been doing that, like I say, probably since at least 2015, making agreements around lithium and rare earths and all sorts of stuff, going through Latin America, going through North Africa, going through Southern Africa. I mean, the Chinese are everywhere, Middle East, to get deals done about gathering resources. That's a huge thing that they've been doing because whoever controls the resources controls the world, right? That's kind of the idea there, as China wants to be the preeminent power in the future. And of course, they were very happy with the Democrats, who they work with a lot. So they always talk about Trump working with the Chinese and the Russians, but it's actually the Democrats are the ones that have been doing that because they've been doing a lot of bad things there. You can guess some of those as well. So securing resources there, and of course outcompeting. Trump just doesn't like to compete, but he wants to outcompete China. And of course, the liberals who we've had for decades now have always talked about managed decline, right? They do corruption and manage decline. But of course, Trump there doesn't want to decline. He wants to grow the US economy. And that was always true. It was always true that America could keep growing faster than China. And now we see China actually struggling, right? China says its GDP is, I think, something like 3 or 4%, but it's probably more like 0% at 1% at most, right? So there's a lot of problems going on in China there at the moment, but there's still obviously an eminent power. So we got, out competing from China, and Trump knows how to do it. And that's why his cabinet, and of course, having Elon Musk on the side, he's got the dream team to do it, right? You need a great leadership team, you need people to execute. And of course, you also need something that they didn't have really that much in when he was the 45 president in the United States. They didn't have a lot of monitoring. Well, this time they got a lot of monitoring built into the White House. And so they are monitoring the fact that Trump's executive orders and the strategy is taking place. And of course, the cabinet meeting is another way of getting that monitoring there. So Trump knows that what he says is going to happen. And of course, they're rooting out the deep state there as well. So some pretty stuff there. So we've got Trump, strength through peace, ending the wars in the world, the major ones, using hard power against the worst of the worst, the terrorists out there, and of course the Islamist plots that are going on. Trump also working for soft power around keeping free speech, as well as dealing with a lot of very rogue states, particularly a lot of Islamist extremists that want to take over the West and are doing a pretty good job, unfortunately. And also, obviously, China there with its big ambitions to become the powerful player, and of course, definitely showing signs that maybe they won't hold on to peace for some time. And we know that President Xi wants his legacy to be Taiwan coming in to the fold of the China family, right? And of course, Taiwan has been multiply more successful than China, given its size, and of course, after the resolution, right? I think it was the Mao Revolution. So, pretty exciting to see where it all heads. Obviously, we want peace because a war would be a horrible thing, unlike anything we've ever seen. So, we don't really want that. So, peace through strength, very important there. So, that's his global plan. He's doing a pretty good job of it. Obviously, he's doing a lot of other things in South America and other places trying to get resources. So, America's catching up on that plot there. So, let's have a look at the strategy for the US economy. So we've talked about a lot of the problems. We've talked about the global solutions that the approach that Trump's taken. But let's get into the nitty gritty about the US economy, the 3-legged stool strategy. Do you like that? The 3-legged stool strategy. And this is really what's going on here with Trump. So the number one, they're looking to reduce debt and spending. but in a controlled fashion by 2028. So this is very important to understand. So they're not going to do it super fast. A lot of the Republicans want to do it very fast, right? Because now they control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They can get away. They've got a thin margin on some votings, but they've still got the controlling three branches of the House. Also, obviously, the majority of the Supreme Court is also on the conservative side generally, although we have seen a few little funny decisions come out of there as well. So who knows what's exactly going on in the Supreme Court sometimes. Is there some blackmailing going on? Who knows? Who knows? Some threatened. Some people feel threatened. I don't know. Democrats can be pretty scary. So we've got reduced debt and spending, but in a controlled fashion. And that's very important that they're going to be doing that by 2028 so that they don't sink the economy while they do cut costs and things like that, right? So they've got to do it in a very, very clever fashion there. Now, the target, of course, is long run. They want to get to 3.5. So maybe 3 at the bottom end, but 3 to 3.5% on the federal deficit to GDP. So remember, GDP, we said it was about 27.8 trillion. So only get about 3 to 3.5% deficit to GDP. We know the deficit is currently running at 2 trillion. And of course, we want to get it down. They were also wanting to move towards a balanced budget and then potentially to move to surplus, which would be the first time in probably decades. So that is going to be very, very exciting to see that play out too. So that's the target set. How are they doing it? Well, we talked about at the beginning. We talked about that deficit of 2 trillion. Remember that we had 5 trillion in earnings for the Fed. We had 7 trillion in expenses and $2 trillion deficit, with 1 trillion being in interest costs. Well, one way to get rid of it is to go through and audit all the US federal government. And that's what Elon Musk is doing with his young, bright super geniuses that are going through there, right? So the target at the moment is about 1 trillion in Dodge. They have already got to about $250 billion already, and they've got a lot of room to go, right? So they went through USAID and things like that, but they've got a lot of work to do there. So 1 trillion is the target, and the chances of getting to it out of a $7 trillion expense is very high. And if we take out the interest expense, 6 trillion. So I think they can do it. So far, $250 billion out of that 7 trillion has been achieved. So they're going to reduce expenses from 25% of GDP, which is what was running under the Bidens. They were extremely spending up. And of course, a lot of corruption and probably tons of kickbacks in the USAID. And of course, completely full of corruption, that database. And of course, the Democrats had set it up. So they were getting billions and billions of dollars to fund not only their own private use, but also their ideological and political ambitions, right, to indoctrinate people as well. So we saw money being spread all around the world, even down here in New Zealand, in large sums. So it's pretty crazy what these people are willing to do. And of course, $1 trillion plus Dodge, reduce expense of 25% of GDP to 21% average. And hopefully they're going to try and move down to 18%. So these are some of the key targets that the Trump administration is going to do there around spending and getting rid of that deficit. So if you have a $2 trillion deficit and you get $1 trillion out, that leaves you only with $1 trillion negative, and that is essentially the same amount as the interest payments, right? And of course, about 40 billion of that goes to China, right? So that's kind of very key there. They're also obviously looking through the Congress there, and this is a process that may take up to maybe June, July, as I understand it. They're trying to renew the tax regime. These are tax cuts that Trump did when he was president for 45 with existing cuts, right? Otherwise, they default back to the old regime with higher taxes. And of course, having lower taxes means that you've got a better consumer, right? Remember, the US, 2/3 of the US is consumption. And so it's a very powerful consumer. And therefore, Trump always talks about playing with cards. Have you got the cards? Well, he's got the cards, right? Because the US is the big consumer of the world, being about 20% of the world's GDP, right? So it's a big, big player. And of course, its power is much wider than just its GDP. So he's looking to renew the tax regime, going to be very important there. And he's looking to grow the economy, right? This is the very big takeout here. So grow the economy from 1.8% to 3% plus, and that includes inflation at about circa 2%, right? So a very big play here. And of course, those tax cuts are very, very important. Now, obviously, if you cut out expenses out of the US government, some of them are waste money, so they're just corruption and fraud. And I think a lot of that 1 trillion was going to be there. And a lot of the programs are just ridiculous programs, unproductive programs. So you're going to move, money away from the public wasting, and you're going to move it slowly into the private sector. So we're going to talk more about that as we go. So very important stuff here. And of course, for every $300 billion you cut out of the federal spending is about 1% of GDP. So you can sort of see how sensitive these rates cuts are. And that's why you can see at the top there, it has to be done in a controlled fashion even despite the excitement for a lot of Republicans in the Congress and Senate to do it very fast. So because they finally got the power to do it, right, and the ambition there. Don't have the Democrats who love spending and corruption in the way, right? So don't have that so much. So that's very important there. So there's just some of the key stuff there. So hopefully there's a lot of insights there for many of you, and of course it gives you a lot of answers because you won't see a lot of this in the mainstream media coverage, right? So very important there. So that's kind of cool. We're heading there. Now let's move on to the second part of the three-legged stool strategy. Let's go into that one. And so we've got the three-legged stool strategy here. Number 2 is deregulation. So deregulating the financial system. And this is going to be very, very important. Now, this has more complex layers, and I'm not going to go into those, but we're just doing a high view. And of course, a big part of that is going to be reducing the public sector size and increasing the private sector. And of course, this is going to give us a productivity boom, right? So very important that we saw the costs coming out of the, not only we're reducing the costs in the federal system, but getting rid of a lot of labor, a lot of staff, right? And of course, we're seeing these letters go out, are you doing 5 things a week? Are you actually at work? Are you doing 2 jobs? Things like that. So the whole thing, do you want to take a voluntary redundancy? And of course, many people are doing that. And so they're shrinking the public sector. And of course, by doing that, they're also getting rid of all the deep state, the hard deep state, and of course the soft deep state. In other words, people that vote for Republican Democrats and things like that. But they're getting rid of a lot of those stuff. So it's very, very cool there. And we saw Elon Musk do it very successfully at Twitter before it became X, right? Firing like 80, 90% of the staff. But he's probably still got a few there as well. But reduce public size there and increase private sector. So this is genius. And of course, those jobs that are lost in the public sector, they will get picked up in the private sector, right, as you grow the economy. So productivity boom will result as well. So kind of cool there. Financial systems will be face deregulation as well. A lot of financial institutions, particularly small, medium banks and things like that, finance companies, often have certain reserves that they have to keep. And they're normally normalized with the large banks, right, which makes no sense, right? Large banks obviously require bigger reserves, but smaller systems don't need it. And therefore, you can open up capital and leverage for businesses to thrive in the entrepreneurial world, right? They're going to change the reserves and boost leverage of the small to medium enterprises through the small to medium banking and finance systems. So that's going to be huge and get rid of a lot of silly regulations there. So pretty important there. The other one, of course, the Federal Reserve and Congress. There'll be hopefully be changes through Congress, so they have to be on board with the Trump strategy. And of course, hopefully prices will go down in that regard, and wages will go up, right? It's because you're moving from the public sector to the private sector, and that will help with wage deflation and wage going up, and prices going down. So very important there. So that's the second part of the three-legged stool strategy that Trump is running through the Treasury Secretary of the United States. The third one, of course, is reorder the international trading system. And this is a big deal there. We see tariffs. Now you know why tariffs are so important. You've got some context now because he's reordering the international trading system and he's getting country alignment, right? So this is verbatim from the Treasury Secretary of the United States in Trump's cabinet. And so now you have a good idea. Why is he doing tariffs? Oh, why? I thought tariffs are supposed to be bad. Consumers pay more and all that sort of stuff, right? But of course, he's using it to do a number of different things, as well as deal with social issues, but also to do with manufacturing in the United States. We talked about that. That's a big problem on our list. Remember, we lost 13% percentage points of manufacturing, 7 million jobs. The middle class got shrunk as well. So obviously getting those incomes back up as well, because manufacturing, particularly back in the 60s and before, funded a lot of the middle class of the United States. So getting those incomes back up, very important there. Tariffs are a key thing to deal with immigration, to deal with drugs, and to deal ultimately with manufacturing in the United States and making America get into the golden age, right? Also, building manufacturing and lowering and predictable taxes. Those are 2 others that he's doing, right? Building manufacturing is very important there, having high tariff barriers. And of course, we've seen that. And of course, lower and predictable taxes. That's why those taxes being continued on through Congress and Senate are very important. Reducing regulations, we talked about that as well. Obviously, regulations between countries and non-trade barriers as well, not just tariff barriers. But non-trade tariff barriers, adding to the price, non-trade barriers being, limits and quotas and things like that. So very awesome there. And of course, cheap energy, right? You expand cheap energy in the United States and around the world, and therefore people can come to the US and do business cheaper, right? Because you've lowered the regulations and the costs, you've lowered the price in terms of energy, and people can do quite high value adds in the United States. So pretty cool. and of course protected by trade barriers. Now, a lot of these tariffs that people put in, like China and places like that, they are dumping products. So they are subsidizing it by the state and dumping it in the United States. So there's actually a lot of bad things happening, and tariffs actually are a good protector against that. So some good stuff happening here. Now, all of these, of course, these three strategies here, they contribute to the to growth. So we talked about the fact that Trump is cutting costs. We saw that, and we also saw, with the Dodge aiming for 1 trillion, and we also saw that Trump is looking to grow the economy from 1.8 up to 3%. And of course, you do that, you're able to get away with those cost reductions. 300 billion is about 1% GDP, and actually grow the U.S. economy. And if you do that, what are you going to do? You're going to get more income. Your GDP will go up from 27.8 trillion, and you're going to be ahead, right? You're going to get to those federal deficit surpluses, and of course you're going to be able to pay down the federal debt, that big $36.6 trillion dollars. So this is some pretty cool stuff here, and it's long overdue, and Trump is doing it with the dream team there. Now, obviously, the golden age of America with the economy, that's what he's dealing with the federal budget strategy. But now with the economy, so that's the government we just talked about, but now we're talking about the U.S. economy more broadly, the golden age of America, right? Trump's promised that, and it's pretty big. So number one, the energy boom and export, oil, gas, LPG, minerals, and rare earth. These are where he's focused on. So they're expanding oil and gas. They're giving out more federal permits and things like that. They're obviously commissioning LPG plants or LNG plants. I've got LPG there, but LNG plants. And of course, they've now confirmed 2 now in the Gulf of America. So that's huge. Another one was approved today, I believe it was. So that's huge there as well. LPG or LNG, I think it's what LNG. I don't know why LPG. LNG is going to be massive for the United States. So a huge boom there. And of course, minerals, they're getting minerals. Obviously, America's already one of the top chemical manufacturers. That can be very important, getting all those minerals that it needs for its technological revolution. And of course, especially rare earths. I can't understate rare earths is a big part here. So semiconductors, rare earths, very important there. But oil and gas will open up the income, lower down prices, and make it cheaper for consumers as well. So big deal there. And of course, bring in new manufacturing investments. We already see something like $2.5 to $3 trillion of investment already come into Trump within about 60 days, right? So huge there from Trump, already coming out, kicking there. Number 2 is audit and leverage, right? So audit and leverage, they want to leverage the America's asset base, but they've got to audit it to find out how much they actually have. What's the asset base of the United States, and how can they leverage that for massive gains for the United States and get that a golden age of America, right? So they're going to be auditing above and below ground in the United States territory. They're going to be auditing the offshore and acquiring new territory. So they're going to be a lot of different type of scans to do that. And that includes also not just the existing United States, but also growing the United States footprint. And we've talked about Greenland. There's multiple reasons for that, right? International security. We've got Chinese and Russian ships flying around there, moving around there. We've also got access to the Arctic, and of course, tons of resources sitting in Greenland, right? Small population, 58,000. A lot of young people there want to join part of America as well. So Greenland is probably a pretty high chance that they could become a state of the United States in some form or another. So we'll be looking forward to that. Panama, of course, the shipping lanes, China taking over the Panama Canal and very sneakily sneaking up there. And of course, the US gave it away to Panama for $1, lost about 35,000 people building it back in the day. I think it was like 1930s or something. And of course, now we've seen BlackRock start to buy up the companies there. And of course, China's getting very annoyed about that, particularly out of Hong Kong, right? So very annoyed about that development there. But Trump was pretty serious. They've got to get Panama back in some form or another, either direct through hard power or soft or indirect through soft power, like BlackRock. And so that is all happening there too. Very important for security, but very important because it costs America a lot of money as the prices of going through that shipping of Panama cost a lot. And of course, we know there's more developments going on there regarding canals through Panama as well. So a big deal there. And Canada, of course, 51st state of America, as Trump would say, Governor Trudeau, as he would call it. And we may see Canada come in some form or another. So it's going to be interesting to see how that actually evolves. Trump seems pretty serious about it. And when pushed to shove, he seemed pretty serious. So we shall see. Now, what would that mean? That would mean that you'd have America with Hawaii. You'd then have Alaska up in the north. And of course, Alaska wants to expand oil and gas, as our first point showed, with the ANWR, opening up ANWR, which is potentially as big as Saudi Arabia. So may end up being, a huge market. At the moment, I think the US is doing about 12% of the world market. That could double that to almost quarter of the world's supply coming out from oil. So we'll see. America didn't really start exporting oil till 2015, so it's a huge upside for that. So pretty big there. So we're going to see what happens to Canada there. So we've got Alaska, we got the Greenland, we got the United States, Panama, and then of course we've got the Gulf of America, and then we've got Canada in the middle there. So let's see what happens. Now, as you guys know, Canada there exports or transports a lot of their sour crude into the United States because under Trudeau, they never built their own refineries, and all the refineries in the United States refining Canada sour oil, right? They're specialized to process sour oil or sour crude, and so Canada's pretty much locked in with the United States. And I think from memory, about 80% or something of its exports go to the United States. So let's see what happens. Obviously, America, the military, dwarfs the Canada. Canada does about $30 billion a year in investment, whereas America's about $880 billion. So it dwarfs that. And of course, so you got military, you got economic, you've obviously got cross-cultural interconnections there. So we'll see where that lands there. And of course, Trump's also been pressuring the Canadian government about drugs. So we'll see what happens with that and crime. So some big stuff happening there. So we'll see what happens. It could be the greatest expansion in the United States. Remember, the United States got Greenland, remember? They bought Greenland. And they bought that off the Russians, right? So the Russians had some debt, so it was a pretty easy one to pay back for a war. And so that was sorry, not Greenland, Alaska I'm talking about. They bought that, and I think it was like $6 or $7 million equivalent or something like that. So let's see where it goes. Pretty exciting. And of course, this is a massive leverage. If the whole of North America is connected up in the United States, then it really does put more pressure on Russia and China. With their, looking for Taiwan and stuff. So these are big power moves, mate. This is power moves. Trump is onto it, man. So it's some good ideas coming out there. It kind of shocks people at first, but when you think about it, it's actually going to make the world a more peaceful place. So very, very cool. Number 3, of course, you've heard about sovereign wealth fund, right? So if you're going to have big money, get big money pool come in, and of course you can invest in this American asset base, right, to leverage that and power these big projects to come into America to make those big earnings. So sovereign wealth fund were really cool, and it's a great idea. We see that work very well in other countries, right? So Singapore, I think, has one of those. So U.S. economy there, the golden age of America. Number 4, replace U.S. infrastructure, utilities, pipelines, and smart logistics. Now, the U.S., like I said, it is the infrastructure is very problematic. The old roads breaking down, all sorts of stuff. So getting utilities in there, pipelines. So we're talking, telecommunications, talking about water pipelines, talking about roads and bridges, things like that. So lots of important stuff to be happening there. So more utilities, more gas pipelines, right? We're seeing that up in New York and places like that. Pipelines need to be built, and smart logistics, so it can lower the prices to consumers dramatically, particularly around gas, right? So a very big deal there. So utilities, pipelines, smart logistics, of course, modernizing the U.S. infrastructure at the same time. Now, at the moment, of course, we saw bipartisan. I think it was a couple $1 billion, about $2 billion. I think about half of that's been spent, maybe even less, has been spent on infrastructure so far, and it's questionable about where that's all gone to. But that is kind of where we are at the moment. But Trump really wants to redo that, so we may see some major investment here in the future. And he needs to find the money, right? If he's not going to find it from the federal budget, he needs to get money from the private sector. And so that all plays into his private sector strategy, right? So that's kind of where we're looking there. And that's why he's getting all these billionaires, tech giants. He had the oil and gas people in today into the White House. And of course, he's getting all these other tech leaders here to come in from all the different sectors of the US economy coming into the White House and getting them to talk about it, getting them to invest. And that's what we see nonstop. So now you can sort of see why so many meetings are happening. None of this happened under Biden, right? So this is very, very exciting. So number 5 there, lead technology. Obviously, over $2.5 to $3 trillion already attracted to this market. And of course, there's an AI war, right? Anybody that controls AI will probably control the future. Some say that AI, particularly AGI, artificial general intelligence, is the biggest technological achievement of humanity that's in progress at the moment. Some say even greater, or maybe only comparable, would be to splitting the atom. And so, this is huge. So AI race is on, and it is accelerating at a super fast rate, not only the software, but also the hardware, right? So we saw NVIDIA coming out with AI robots there. I don't know if you saw that yesterday. Got a little AI robot, pretty clever thing. So we're starting what we see in the movies is starting to become real, right? So pretty crazy there. Also, cars, leading in cars. Obviously, America wants to sell its cars to Europe. Europe blocks that, right? They sell their cars back. So we've got a lot of issues there. The US wants to get manufacturing of cars back in the US as well. And of course, tariffs has become a big vehicle for that. Digital blockchain, obviously, Trump there doing the digital speech yesterday, supporting Bitcoin as strategic reserve, doing this, the altcoin stockpile. So it's huge for the blockchain. And of course, we all know, being in crypto for ages, that's where all the financial innovation is. And of course, if you go back to TradeFi, it's like going back to snail pace. But in crypto, we're in the fast lane, right? We've got the volatility though too, and a lot of surprises as well. So it doesn't go without that. And as DJ Paulie Wood said, RH there doing some pretty big moves today on the old PDI there. And hopping in the old SOMI Telegram. So got lots of actions going on there. We're talking about it in the Discord there, DJ Bollywood, but that's not really the topic of this video. So there we go. We also got semiconductors. Obviously going to be huge, bringing, like I said, the US is about 12% of the market. Got to bring a lot more of that. Now, when I say 12%, it's kind of a different type of chips that are being made. So we need to bring on the mainstream chips and stuff like that. Now, US does control the actual design, I think, of chip makers, but it needs to bring in all that manufacturing. And that's huge, right? Because if you're going to have a modern society, you got to have the chip makers, right? You got to have the AI. You got to have it all together, right? Also, robotics is obviously a big deal. Robotics is huge now. We saw Boston AI come out yesterday with a video of their robot doing flips and cartwheels and all sorts of crazy things. And of course, now they're using motion capture and all sorts of stuff to train their bot robotics, and it's looking pretty scary. So we're only probably 3 to 5 years away from having robots with AI walking the streets. It really is that quick. We've seen a big acceleration, and with these new AI chips from NVIDIA and places like that, like the Blackwell chip, it is a big game changer. This place is going to get pretty scary. We also saw that in Ukraine, right, with robotic dogs being used on the field, and of course drones everywhere, right? So we've got a lot of stuff happening in that space, and of course ultimately space, right? Elon Musk is Trump's special government employee and working for Dodge, but also obviously doing his Starship, trying to go to Mars, right, and make humans a multiplanetary species, as he likes to say. Pretty risky business, but just landing on Mars would be pretty cool. Can they make a base on Mars within 30 years? That'd be another interesting thing, because obviously Mars is extremely hostile to life, and the gravity, of course, only about a third of the Earth's gravity, and of course radiation pummeling the planet, and of course has very thin atmosphere. So it's going to be pretty hard to live there. It's extremely cold as well. I think it's like negative 70 degrees or something, Celsius or something. So pretty cold place. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see that play out. But anyway, landing on Mars is going to be a big deal. Imagine seeing a ship do that. And of course, he's got his own robots, right? They're going to have AI, and that is the Optimus robot that will be landing with these spaceships. Probably send a batch of the spaceships up end of next year is his plan, October, November. And of course, that's where Earth is closest to Mars, and of course the communication by light there is about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So it takes about that long to get between Earth and Mars, and so he'll be trying to do to get that up and running. It'll all be run automatically by the AI, no doubt, and particular programs that run. So imagine spaceships launching there, landing spaceships landing on Mars, and you're going to get video broadcast of this. And then having the Optimus robots step out into Mars. It's exactly out of the movies, and that's what's about to happen in the United States. This is how America is going to become leading the greatness, because Musk is leading the world in space technology, despite great achievements from China and India and Russia. The Starship is leading the way by quite a bit. So, but it's going to be fun to see that, and landing on Mars. Also, of course, Trump announced for military the Star Wars anti-nuclear defense system for the United States. That definitely the technology is here for that. And we should also see that Elon Musk is also obviously controlling Starlink. I think there's about 6,000 satellites, something like that, up there at the moment. And I think they're targeting about 35,000 satellites for Earth alone. So you can imagine that satellites will also be sent to Mars. And so we're going to have a satellite system from Mars from Elon. And of course, you're going to have spaceships landing there. We're about to enter an extremely exciting age over the next 20 to 30 years. And so let's see where it goes. Elon Musk yesterday said that it was a 20% chance that AI would destroy us within the next 5 years. So fingers crossed we're on the 80%, right? 20% is a pretty bad percentage, by the way. Just to take you that 1 in 20 is a bad percentage. So 20% is pretty bad. So hopefully he's wrong about that. So that's kind of where we are there on leading technology. It's going to be massive convergence because the power of these AI chips and so-called quantum chips, right? So that's questionable whether they're truly quantum, but quantum chips out at the moment. And of course, we will see how that all evolves. It's a pretty crazy time. Star Trek and Star Wars are becoming real, and that's the funny thing about all this, right? So that is kind of where we are there as well. So kind of cool. So that's number 4 and 5. Now we've also got further stuff here. I realized I didn't do the number counting, but this is actually number 6, 7, and 8. And we've got rebuild manufacturing, especially AI and semiconductors in America. So that's what Trump needs to do, and that's what he is doing. He's bringing manufacturing. He's doing AI and semiconductors. So all the investment that we've seen, $2 to $3 trillion, has been in this area. Also, that by rebuilding manufacturing, we lost 7 million jobs. He's going to recreate that for the middle class. And of course, the Democrats were actively shrinking the middle class. And of course, with this net zero and climate change nonsense, while they were living, buying coastal homes and flying jets. And of course, now we also will get higher wages, right? So this is going to lift the middle class, make it grow, and Americans richer and wealthier, right? Number 7, align countries with tariffs. Fair and free trade with reciprocal tariffs starting on the 2nd of April. Plus selected tariff walls that he probably will keep up for a long time to so that they can get their steel, aluminum, and copper. Why do you need all those? Well, if you're going to be building ships, obviously Trump's talked about growing military ships and civilian ships, including 48 icebreakers up north. So lots of things happening here. So we're still going to see a massive growth in the shipbuilding in America, like it used to be in the golden days. And so it's going to be huge, and tariffs are going to be used to do that. You're also going to need, obviously, steel, aluminum, and copper, and avoid dumping, right, by these foreign countries to build all the big infrastructure, all the big buildings that Trump's going to build, all those sort of things that need to be done, planes, etc., cars, all going to happen there, and, of course, protected by these tariff wars. The other thing, of course, that also will enable fair and free trade. So we're going to see probably trade generally improve. It's going to be pretty rough at first, as there's a bit of a short-term trade war, perhaps, and then we're going to see deals be done and fair and free trade. So Trump may very well make not just free trade in the world, but fairer trade, right? Because the EU and other countries are doing dumping. They're also doing non-trade tariffs, and they're also doing tariffs, right? So obviously, when in EU not taking American cars and things like that. So this is a kind of ironic that Trump is leading the free trade, free world there. It's a pretty big deal. And number 7, 8. Number 8 there, secure resources and automate production. So Trump and his cabinet are going around to secure resources. They're late on the game on this around rare earths, but they're doing pretty well on a lot of the other minerals. But they've got to go get those, lithium and more lithium and stuff like that, and also open up, domestic production as well. They're also going to automate production, obviously, with AI chips, and of course, Elon Musk is king on automating the factory. So he often says that's the biggest thing, actually, more important than the product itself, is automating that production. So some big thing there. So those are the top 8 things, the golden age of America, and that gets us to the golden age. You can see we've got a golden tab here. This is the final slide. So America, the home of the brave and the land of the free. And of course, you've got to be brave to do these things. You've got to take brave steps, and you've got to be free while you're doing it, right? Which is why we see J.D. Vance, they're holding up many of the tyrannical Western powers to protect freedom. And of course, this is going to usher in the golden age of America, right? Being brave and holding to the true principles of which have made America great, freedom. And of course, the Judeo-Christian background behind that been very fundamental to all that. So this is our final thing. He's going to build and leverage great assets and buildings. He's going to modernize America and make societies flourish. It's going to be pretty crazy, and you're going to find it very hard for people to criticize him because things will be so damn good. He's going to achieve great things. He's going to do the Star Wars and the Land on Mars events. Those are going to be streamed online. It's going to be crazy stuff, and we could have that as soon as the end of next year, with Elon Musk indicating October, November for that window. So it could be only 3 months, 4 months to get there to Mars. So we could have that by early 2027. We could see a ship landing, if not the end of 2026, the beginning of 27. We could see a whole ton of starships landing on Mars, assuming all their development program keeps going as planned. and seeing the Optimus robots land on Mars. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy. It will be a crazy thing to see. And then, of course, dramatically reduce major societal problems. We talked about all those societal problems earlier. He's going to lift the standard of living and restore the American dream. And I think that's going to be huge. And so, yeah, it's exciting times. It's going to be pretty epic. So, hope you guys enjoyed that coverage. And I know DJ Paulie wanted me to cover the RH stuff, but of course, that's probably a video for another time. We are discussing that in Discord, though. So, I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you're watching us afterwards on Rumble, big shout out to viewers over there. Don't forget to like and share this channel around for sure. And yeah, I'll catch you on the next video tomorrow. We'll be covering crypto, and we'll definitely cover the RH stuff then. All right, take care, everybody, and see you in Discord. Bye for now.